Yes, Just, just a moment. So good evening, everybody. So this is week 5 of these lectures for the course Classics in Neuroscience. As you might already know, I am one of your TAs, and how we go about this particular live discussion is basically first we discuss the previous year questions pertaining to that particular week's lectures, and thereafter we understand certain concepts related to classics in neuroscience that might be required for your fundamental understanding of the subject, right? So again, we'll divide the class into those two parts. Firstly, let us begin with our discussion of the previous year questions for week 5. So yeah, so let's go in over here. Uh, what function does the muscle spindle serve in the human body? Right. So muscle spindle is basically those bundles of muscle fibers. So what function does it serve in the human body? Does it generate nerve impulses for movement or signal the spinal cord about muscle stretching and contraction, or produce neurotransmitters such as acetylcholine, or control the heart rate through motor neurons, right? So which one of these does it actually do, right? So the correct answer for this is option B, that it basically signals the spinal cord about the stretching as well as the contraction of the muscle. So it helps transfer that particular signal to the spinal cord. Spinal cord is the one which makes decisions regarding what response needs to be done, or what kind of an action needs to be taken, or which kind of a neurotransmitter should be produced, etc. Right? So, for instance, there is an external stimulus, right? And this is the set of muscle fibers, which together is known as the muscle spindle, that are present. For instance, over here we are talking about the thigh muscle, the quadriceps, right? So if there is a stimulus at the knee, this particular muscle spindle will take this particular signal to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord will finally decide whether this muscle should be contracted and this should be flexed, so that that knee jerk reflex can be achieved or not, right? So that is the primary goal of the muscle spindle over here, right? And in general also. What did Rancho cell contribute to the understanding of the spinal cord pathways, right? So, what was Rancho cell? If you know this, you will have this answer already. Was it that they enhanced motor coordination through sensory integration, or recurrent inhibition via interneurons and motor axon collaterals, or excitation of muscle fibers during contraction, or activation of sensory neurons during reflex actions, right? So, which one of these is actually the correct answer? What did these Renshaw cells help us understand in the spinal cord pathway, right? So, if you have a basic understanding of what Renshaw cells were, you will certainly know that they had something to do with inhibition. At least this much you remember, right? So, the correct answer for, even if you remember that much, you will have the correct answer, which is recurrent inhibition via interneurons and motor axon collaterals, right? So, what exactly was the Renshaw cell? Let us revise a little bit, right? So, before that, there is another circuitry of inhibitory neurons that is present in the spinal cord circuit. These are the inhibitory interneuron. They by self, in their naming itself, it is known as inhibitory interneuron, right? So, for instance, if we take this example of an extensor muscle or flexor muscle, right? You can see that if, for instance, there is a muscle which is going to flex, right? That muscle is bringing some signal to the spinal cord. The spinal cord is assisting that particular muscle to flex, but along with that, it is also connected to an interneuron, right? Which is telling the opposite muscle to extend, right? It is telling the opposite muscle to perform the opposite function. This muscle, it is telling to flex, but the opposite muscle, it is asking to extend. It is because it is inhibiting the activity of the other muscle, which is on the contralateral side of that particular muscle, which is actually bringing the signal. So this particular neuron is the inhibitory interneuron, right? So let us read about it. The IA, inhibitory interneuron, regulates contraction in antagonist muscles in stretch reflex circuits through its divergent contacts with the motor neurons. Right? So it is always controlling, this inhibitory interneuron is always controlling uh, the antagonist muscle response, right? For instance, it is there in this thigh, in case of the thigh also, it is there in case of the elbow also, right? That one will extend, the other will flex like that, right? So these kinds of responses are there in all these joints. Um, in addition, the interneuron receives excitatory and inhibitory inputs from the corticospinal and other descending pathways also. So there are some signals that are coming from the brain also, right? So these are the other descending and corticospinal pathway. A change in balance of these supraspinal signal allow the interneuron to coordinate co-contractions in antagonist muscle at a joint, right? So this is the role of the inhibitory interneuron, dedicated inhibitory interneuron that is present at the spinal cord. But apart from this, there is another kind of inhibitory interneuron that is present, which is known as Renshaw cell, right? So what does this Renshaw cell do, right? So this is the Renshaw cell. Now what happens? Over here also, this is the flexor muscle, this is the extensor muscle. So again, this muscle is sending the signal, right? And this muscle is independently receiving signal from this IA, inhibitory interneuron, right? But the beauty of this Renshaw cell is that this muscle, which is sending the signal, right? Even this muscle will have a negative feedback response for this own muscle itself, so that it doesn't continue to stay contracted. It, after a point, it relaxes also, right? So that is where this Renshaw cell comes into picture, right? So it will be a negative feedback response for the same muscle also, and along with that, it will also assist in establishing this network of the inhibitory neuron as well, right? So Renshaw cells are spinal interneurons and that produce recurrent inhibition of motor neurons. These interneurons are excited by collaterals from motor neurons and inhibit those same motor neurons, right? So this motor neuron is taking the signal. One collateral, one branch from this will go and it will signal this the negative feedback also. So that is the motor neuron collateral, right? And it will in turn, uh, subside the activity of this same motor neuron. This negative feedback system regulates motor neuron excitability and stabilizes firing rates. Renshaw cells also send collaterals to synergist motor neurons, which is not shown over here, and IA inhibitory interneurons that synapse on antagonist motor neurons that is seen over here. Thus, descending inputs that modulate the excitability of Renshaw cells adjust the excitability of all motor neurons around the joint. I hope this difference is clear because now we are understanding both of them simultaneously. What exactly is the purpose of inhibitory interneuron and what exactly is Renshaw cell? Why I had kept both these representations side by side is so that you can understand the difference, that it is not just an inhibiting interneuron, but the distinction, that it is basically the one which is inhibiting because of the feedback mechanism to the same motor neuron that is actually exciting it, right? So that is the distinction over here. So I hope that is apparent now to you. Thereafter, question number 3 is, what is the significance of Wilder-Penfield's cortical mapping? Right? Was it the discovery of myelin structure, or identification of motor and sensory homunculus, or the first recordings of the visual cortex neurons, or the mapping of synaptic vesicles? Right? So, which one of these is actually the answer? Yeah, so the answer over here is B, right? So we have discussed this even before this particular week's lectures. But this in this week also, Sir's lecture also included this, that motor and somatosensory homunculus was basically what was you know the result out of Penfield's experiment, right, of cortical mapping, and how that happened. We have briefly discussed before, and what exactly this somatosensory cortex is, motor cortex is, that I'll discuss in the second part of the presentation today, right? In brief, if we talk about, this is the sensory model, the somatosensory homunculus. This is the motor homunculus. So these are the models that were built from the data acquired by Wilder Penfield, and currently these are housed in the Natural History Museum, London. So even over here, if you see, right? So somatosensory meaning which organ. So in this particular figure, the organs that have more number of neurons dedicated to them have more area that is contributed to them, and these organs that have less number of neurons dedicated to them are smaller in this case, right? So over here you can see that in case of sensory model, right? For instance, your hands, your fingers, your tongue, your lips, right? These are very, very neuron dense organs, right? Why? Because lip is involved in speech also, it is involved in eating also, tongue is involved in speech, eating, fingers are involved in a lot of fine motor functions, right? Comparatively, if you see from our feet, we don't do those many functions, right? We just walk on our feet, right? So, multiple, we don't sense things from our feet per se, right? But we sense everything with our hands. We work with our hands. We are eating with our hands. We are doing multiple gestures with our hands. So, that is why there are more number of neurons that are actually dedicated to our hands and our fingers rather than our feet and our toe, and even rather than our arms. So because we are not generally feeling things, or we are not sensing things per se with our arms also, right? Generally the hands are more responsible for that. Similarly, when we are performing function in response to something that we have just uh, some stimulus that has come, right? So most of the work also again that we are performing is through our hand, through our fingers. So see how much space has been dedicated, how much of the particular homunculus has been dedicated to our hands and fingers, to our again lips, mouth, eyes, because visually also we are always processing even odor. So all these senses have more dedication over here, but again you can see the arms over here are thinner even, because we are not really, we are just extending and flexing our arms, we are bringing it back, but we are not particularly performing any other directional function with it, right? So it is not really helping us much apart from that particular simple function in terms of motor behavior, right? So more area is dedicated to parts which are more motor more active and more diverse kind of motor functions they are performing, right? So again, you can see over here in sensory model, there the ear have a good enough area that has been dedicated to them, but we are not performing any motor function with the ear, right? We are not responding anything with the ear. So over here again in the motor model, you can see that the ear does not really have a much big of a representation. Right, so not many motor neurons are dedicated to that region, but a lot of sensory neurons are actually dedicated to that region, right? This is what it means. So again, this is a representation of the sensory homunculus and motor homunculus, right? So this is the uh, primary motor area, primary somatosensory area. We will discuss about these areas in the brain also. So you can see that these are like two strips in the cerebrum itself that are lying almost next to each other. Sensory homunculus, you can see that the lower lip has such a huge area dedicated to it. The foot has a huge area dedicated to it. Tongue has a huge area dedicated to it, right? Again, wrist, hand, fingers together, if we account for that, then so much of area is dedicated for that. While for the entire arm, only this much area is dedicated. For the entire forearm, only this much area is dedicated, while the index finger alone or the thumb alone has this much, which is much higher than that, right? Similarly, even in the motor, you can see that vocalization is a big part of the motor homunculus. Again, hand has a big area, right? Along with that, the fingers, etc., have a big area, right? So, similarly, similar to what we have discussed a while back, right? Yeah. So, which two motor systems were identified based on their functions, right? Was it the pyramidal and extrapyramidal systems, or the motor and sensory systems, or visual and auditory systems, or reflexive and voluntary systems, right? So, which were the two motor systems that were identified based on the functionality? So, the answer to this one is pyramidal and extrapyramidal systems, right? So, because both are motor systems, anyway, motor and sensory is not an option for you over here, right? Visual and auditory is a different kind of discussion. They are both sensory and motor modalities they have, right? Similar over here. But the correct answer for this particular question is pyramidal and extrapyramidal. Now, what is pyramidal? What is extrapyramidal, right? So, a brief way to describe it is that pyramidal is basically when the signal is directly traversing from the from the middle of the brain to the spinal cord, and then it is being carried on by the spinal cord from the lateral neurons over there. But or the lower motor neurons over there. But extrapyramidal is when it is taking a break in the brain. So from the point of generation, it is going to a say a cerebellum or brainstem region of the brain, and from there it is getting regenerated, and then it is traversing to the spinal cord, and from there again it is going forward, right? So it is an indirect path that it is taking. So, if we have to distinguish between these pyramidal tracts and extrapyramidal tracts, right, we can say that the origin of pyramidal tract is the motor cortex in the brain, while extrapyramidal tracts can be originated either in the motor cortex or the brainstem nuclei, right? Uh, the pathway that is taken by this pyramidal tract is corticospinal pathway or corticobulbar pathway, while the extrapyramidal tracts take these pathways, which is rubrospinal or vestibulospinal or reticulospinal or tectospinal or cerebellar pathways, right? The function of pyramidal tracts is voluntary as well as skilled movements and fine motor controls, right? So if, for instance, I am thinking that I have to, move this mouse, it is a voluntary movement. So the signal that is going to come to my fingers and my hand to move the mouse is going to be through this pyramidal tract. Then the extrapyramidal, the function is posture, muscle tone, balance, involuntary movements, and gross motor control, right? So all these are things that I am not constantly thinking about, right? Even respiration, for instance, even the heartbeat, whatever little bit is managed by the brain itself, right? So all these things that I'm not thinking about, they are involuntarily happening. They are basically through this extrapyramidal tract, through the cerebellum or the brainstem. Then the pyramidal tract directly innervates the lower motor neurons, but the extrapyramidal tract indirectly influences lower motor neurons via the brainstem nuclei. Right, so over here the information is being taken to the brainstem, and over there, those neurons are generating a secondary signal, which is then getting transferred to the lower motor neurons, right? Then pyramidal tracts, the lesions or the damage that has been associated to it is spastic paralysis or weakness. There are multiple others also. And extrapyramidal tracts, the damage or lesions that have been linked to it is rigidity, tremors, postural instability, or movement disorders such as Parkinson's, right? Thereafter, if we talk about neurotransmitters, the pyramidal tracts primarily utilize glutamate, right? Over here, there is a direct transfer that is happening. They are utilizing glutamate, while this extrapyramidal tracts involve dopamine, GABA, serotonin, and norepinephrine. Dopamine, in particular, plays a critical role in the basal ganglia, a key component of the extrapyramidal system, right? So, for an involuntary responses, actually, a lot of these neurotransmitters are required, right? And over here, dopamine, for instance, is a key neurotransmitter that gets affected in case of Parkinson disease also, right? So that is why Parkinson is mentioned as a side effect of extrapyramidal tracts getting affected. Okay. So which cells in the retina did Keffer Hartline a study for signal processing, right? Was it the eccentric cells in the horseshoe crab retina, or the ganglion cells in the mammals, or the amacrine cells in humans, or the cone cells in birds, right? So the correct answer for this one is eccentric cells in the horseshoe crab retina, right? So this is what the eccentric cell looks like, right? They have multiple uh, kinds of signals. They have a primary eye, secondary eye, like that. And all these signals from this retinular cells, they come and they converge basically to the extrinsic cell, right? So this is the diagram of the ommatidium if you want to look at it. Uh, the horseshoe crab's retina contains eccentric cells which are unique to this species. These cells are coupled with the dendrites of the normal retinal cells, meaning that when a normal retinal cell depolarizes in presence of light, the eccentric cell also depolarizes, right? Because it is getting the signal from this retinal cells. This coupling allows horseshoe crab to perceive light in a way that is different from other arthropods, which typically have different photoreceptors sensitive to different spectrums of light. The eccentric cell in horseshoe crab's retina play a crucial role in animals' visual system, contributing to its ability to see in low light conditions as well as overall visual acuity. Right? Okay. Again, we are going to discuss about Renshaw cells again. What feature of Renshaw cell inhibition was discovered by Eccles and colleagues, right? Was it hypopolarization that is caused by motor axon collaterals, or excitatory pathways that is triggered by reflex action, or the vesicular transport mechanisms in the synaptic transmission, or the decoding neural circuits through recurrent excitation? Now, we have just a while back discussed about Renshaw cells, and the first thing that we need to remember regarding that is it is not associated with excitation, right? It is associated with inhibition. So automatically B and D we will not choose, right? Along with that, we had also discussed that the motor axon that is bringing the information from a particular muscle, it is going to have some collaterals or some branches which is going to stimulate or bring take the signal to the Renshaw cells also, right? So a is the correct answer, right? Over here, again, you can look at a more simplified version of what we have discussed about. So, for instance, this symbol is for excitation and this symbols are for inhibition, right? So, there is a motor neuron that is coming from the muscle, right? The muscle that is contracting or that has to contract, it will take that signal for contraction, but along with that, there will be a branch of these motor axons, which are known as motor axon collaterals, which will also stimulate this negative feedback response, wherein they will, uh, they will excite the Renshaw cells. The Renshaw cell in turn will go and it will inhibit this motor neuron, and it will also inhibit the IA inhibitory interneuron, right? Which in turn will go and inhibit the contralateral muscle also, or the antagonist muscle also, right? So this is how it works. So hyperpolarization of Renshaw cells caused by motor axon collaterals is a mechanism that Eccles and his colleagues first described in 1941. This phenomena involves the activation of Renshaw cells by antidromic impulses in motor neurons, motor axons, which then inhibit the monosynaptic reflex in homonymous and synergistic motor neurons. The inhibition is dependent on the recurrent collaterals of motor axons activating interneurons, specifically Renshaw cells, which discharge to inhibit motor neurons. This process is crucial for maintaining the balance and coordination of motor output in the spinal cord. Okay. So, coming to question number 7. What is the role of pyramidal motor system, right? So is it for the fine motor control via direct spinal cord synapses, or general motor coordination via the brainstem, or transmission of sensory impulses to the cortex, or regulation of involuntary muscle movements, right? So which of these is the role of pyramidal motor system? Again, we have just understood the pyramidal and extrapyramidal system also. So from that, you can derive the answer for this as well, right? So pyramidal system, if you remember, was a direct system, right? So the answer for this is fine motor control via direct spinal cord synapses. So the primary motor cortex will directly take this signal to the spinal cord. This will be via the upper motor neuron. Then this upper motor neuron will transfer this signal to the lower motor neuron, which will then take it to the NMJ or to the place which needs to be stimulated, right? Then what did Jerry Letwin's work on frog's retina reveal? The first recordings of the optic nerve, or the mechanism of lateral inhibition in visual perception, or retinal ganglion cells act as feature detectors, or that chemical basis of neurotransmission in vision. Right. So what was the result or the outcome of Jerry Letwin's work on frog's retina? Right. So if you remember, Jerry Letwin was the one who had published an article titled "What the Frog's Eye Tells the Frog's Brain." Right, a very well perceived, very well written article. Right. So the correct answer for this one is retinal ganglion cells act as feature detectors. Right. So what his work basically derived was that it is not just getting stimulated. Retinal ganglion cells are not just getting stimulated in response to pulses of light, but they are also getting stimulated by the movement, patterns or by how something is gliding in front of them, what is the shape of the stimulus, etc. Right? So the initial argument that Jerry Letwin had given in his paper is that the assumption has always been that the eye mainly senses light, whose local distribution is transmitted to the brain in a kind of copy by mosaic of impulses. So he wanted to counter this and say that the nervous apparatus in eye itself is devoted to detecting certain patterns of light and their changes corresponding to particular relations in the visible world. Right? He took an example that a bright spot appearing in receptive field, its actual sensible properties included not only the intensity of the light but also the shape of the edge, its size, curvature, contrast, etc. Right? From the variety of stimuli, we should then try to discover what common features were abstracted by whatever groups of fibers we could find in the optic nerve. This was what they wanted to pursue, right? What they finally found was that there were actually four separate operations in the image in the frog's eye. Each has its result transmitted by a particular group of fibers uniformly distributed across the retina, and they are all nearly independent of the general illumination. Right? These operations included sustained contrast detection, net convexity detection, moving edge detection, and net dimming detection. Right? So, multiple features were actually being able to detect. So, that is why this feature detector was the result of Jerry Litwin's work on Frog's retina. Right? Then, question number 9. What technological breakthrough allowed Richard Young to advance visual cortex studies? Was it microelectrode recording in the cat, or invention of electron microscope, or discovery of the Nernst equation, or fluorescent dye imaging? Right? So, fluorescent dye imaging came much later. Nernst equation was used for this resting membrane potential, which was not at all the study of this week's lecture, also, or Richard Junk was not really working on that. Electron microscope, again, in this relation, it was not being talked about. So, multi electrode recording in cat is the actual correct answer. Then question number 10 is, what theory of olfaction was developed by Edgar Adrian? Was it the chromatographic theory, or the pattern theory of odor representation, or the receptor specificity hypothesis, or the spatial frequency theory? Right, so all these were actually uh, theories with regard to either auditory or olfaction signal, but which one was developed by Edgar Adrian? It was basically the pattern of odor representation, right? Uh, yeah, so that is it for the first part of the lecture, at least. I'll stop sharing the screen and I'll just share the other slide. So I hope till now whatever has been discussed is clear. If in case there is a problem, please let me know. We can go through that concept again, right? Or something that might not have covered over here. If you have a doubt with that, you can go ahead. Let me know. Sorry. I'll try to sort that out, even if it is not possible in today's class per se. I'll definitely, try to sort it out by the next lecture at least. Um, so that is what. What we'll actually be doing in this week's live discussion, what we'll be studying is regarding different regions of the brain, because I thought that although we were looking at the molecular level of the brain, how particular neurons are working, how action potentials are being generated, how that neuronal circuitry is working, but a lot of studies in this week's discussion has something to do with certain regions of the brain. And it occurred to me that if you are new to neuroscience, you might not really know these regions of the brain, right? So first, we'll be looking at these regions of the brain, their particular functions. Thereafter, we'll move on to a discussion of, you know, What else we'll be discussing? Just let me recall a little bit. Uh, yeah, so I actually have a lot of slides for this week. Yeah, so post this discussion, uh, yeah, we are looking at the that is another very big discussion. Yeah. So two major things I have kept. They have a lot of subtopics within them. One is these different kinds of regions in the brain, their functionality. That is what we are going to discuss, and certain experiments as and when they come up, if they are relevant to our discussion and to your week 5 lectures, we'll discuss that as well. And the second most important thing that I have focused on is the study about these motor sensory areas, somatosensory areas, as well as the motor cortex area. So we have discussed that also in detail. And as a result of that, again, that homunculus portion that we had discussed in the first part of the lecture, that again, we have a brief discussion about that as well. Thereafter, we have gone towards the understanding of these sensory modalities, right? The senses such as vision or auditory senses, olfaction, taste, as well as touch. So, how these are actually working? What is the system behind it? What is the difference in the neuronal patterning of each of these senses, right? That also we have kept. I am not sure if we'll be able to take up all of this in today's lecture, but I have anyway prepared that material. Even if we are not able to finish it in today's, like I'll go quickly, right? I'll not dwell a lot on one particular kind of topic. I'll try to finish it quickly. Even if we are not able to do that, I'll take up whatever portion is left in the next week's discussion, right? So this is the major part of what we are going to study today. Okay. So, we'll begin. Before beginning, please give me like a moment. I'll just have water. Yes. So when we talk about parts of the brain, right? So let us begin at this very broad level, wherein we talk about the components inside the brain itself. So the adult brain consists of four major parts: the brain stem, cerebellum, um, diencephalon, as well as the cerebrum, right? So over here you can see brain in different developing stages, right? This during development there is something known as telencephalon also, that is very starkly present. Then there's mesencephalon, diencephalon, uh, metencephalon, myelencephalon, right? Eventually a lot of these portions, they get more developed than the others. So we have these portions, the major ones, which are the diencephalon, the cerebrum, and the cerebellum, right? Um, yeah. So the brain stem is continuous with the spinal cord and consists of the medulla oblongata over here, the pons, and the midbrain, right? The posterior to the brain stem is the cerebellum. So this is cerebellum, right? Superior to the brainstem is the diencephalon over here, which consists of the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. We'll come to where exactly those are. Supported on the diencephalon and the brainstem is the cerebellum, the largest part of the brain, right? So, if you look at brain in the sagittal plane, right? So, if this is the brain, if you cut it into half like this, and then you pick up that half and you look at it like this, that is this view, the sagittal section of the brain. So you can see that there is the cerebrum, which is the largest portion of the brain. There is the cerebellum that you are aware of. There is this brain stem, right? The medulla oblongata, the pons, the midbrain region, right? All these are a part of the brain stem itself. There is the spinal cord, which is in continuation with the brain stem. Then there is this pineal gland, right? There is hypothalamus over here. There is thalamus over here. And a pituitary gland over here. Yeah, as you might already know, there are a lot of pituitary hormones, hypothalamic hormones that are regulating, various uh, things in our body, right? So this is the major structure of the brain. So when we talk about brainstem and reticular formation, the brainstem is a part of brain between the spinal cord and the diencephalon, right? It consists of three structures, as we saw, medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain. Extending through the brainstem is the reticular formation, a net-like region interspersed gray as well as white matter, right? So if we talk about medulla oblongata, this is medulla oblongata, right, just before the spinal cord. Medulla is continuous with the superior part of the spinal cord. It forms the inferior part of the brainstem. So it is towards the bottom of the brainstem and towards the top of the spinal cord is what it means, right? The medulla's white matter contains all sensory tracts and motor tracts that extend between the spinal cord and other parts of the brain. So this is regarding the white matter, right? It also contains several nuclei. Nuclei basically means collections of cell bodies of neurons, right? Some of these nuclei control vital body functions. Examples of nuclei in medulla that regulate vital activities include the cardiovascular center, the medullary rhythmic center, right? So all these respiration, the heart beating, right? These are involuntary functions that are taken care of by these bundles of nuclei that are present in the medulla oblongata, right? The cardiovascular center regulates the rate and force of heartbeat and diameter of the blood vessels. And the medullary respiratory center adjusts the basic rhythm of breathing. Besides regulating the heartbeat, blood vessel diameter, and the normal beating rhythm, nuclei in the medulla also control reflexes for vomiting, swallowing, sneezing, coughing, as well as hiccuping, right? Also, nuclei associated with sensations of touch, pressure, vibration, conscious proprioception are located in the posterior part of the medulla as well, right? So medulla also contains nuclei that are components of the sensory pathway for gustation, which is responsible for taste, audition, which is hearing, and equilibrium or balance, right? So for this also, the component is present in the medulla itself. It contains nuclei associated with following five pairs of cranial nerves, right? So there are 12 cranial nerves, as you might already know. Out of those 12, the nuclei for five of those nerves is also present in the medulla itself, right? Which are vestibulocochlear nerves, glossopharyngeal nerves, vagus nerve, which is one of the main one, right? Accessory nerve and hypoglossal nerves, right? So You can see, and you can also see that the other nerves, where are they located? Where are their nuclei located, right? So for these nerves, the nuclei are located in the uh, medulla oblongata itself, right? Then we come to pons. So this region is the pons. The pons, which is the bridge, lies directly superior to the medulla and anterior to the cerebellum, right? Anterior meaning in front of the cerebellum. So, like if this is our cerebellum, just in front of that will be the pons. As its name implies, it is a bridge that connects parts of the brain with one another. These connections are provided by bundles of axons. Some axons or pons connect the right and left side of the cerebellum, right? Others are part of ascending and descending ascending sensory tracts and descending motor tracts. Just a moment. Yes. So it has two major structural components, which one is a ventral region and the other is a dorsal region, right? The ventral region of the pons, uh, ventral meaning towards the this side and dorsal meaning towards this back side, right? So dorsal region will be facing the cerebellum and ventral will be towards the front. Ventral region of the pons forms a large synaptic relay station consisting of scattered gray centers called the pontine nuclei. Entering and exiting these nuclei are numerous white matter tracts, each of which provides a connection between cortex of the cerebral hemisphere and that of opposite hemisphere of the cerebellum. Right. So tracts, meaning bundles of axons, are what is the main composition of pons. Right. And what is it is a center from where for instance, there is a bunch of cell nuclei over here, like cell bodies over here in the left side of my brain, and it has to relay some information. So that information is going to go to the pons, and from pons, that bundle of axon will be then read by the right side of my cerebellum. So information is going through this tract, right? And similarly, from the right side of my cerebrum, it will go to the left side of my cerebellum. So those crossovers are also happening over here in pons, right? This complex circuitry plays an essential role in coordinating and maximizing the efficiency of the voluntary motor output throughout the body. Yes. So the dorsal region of the pons is more like the other regions of the brainstem, the medulla and midbrain. So the one that is towards the backside, right? It contains ascending and descending tracts along with the nuclei of the cranial nerves, similar to what we were seeing in case of medulla. The pons contains nuclei associated with the following four pairs of cranial nerves: the trigeminal nerve, the abducens nerves, the facial nerves and the vestibulocochlear nerves, right? So these are the ones that are responsible for that have their nuclei that are situated in the pons region of the brain. Also, within the pons is the pontine respiratory group. Together with the medullary respiratory center, pontine respiratory group helps to control the breathing, right? Then comes the midbrain, just on top of the pons. The midbrain or mesencephalon extends from the pons to the diencephalon. It is the region between the two. Like the medulla and pons, the midbrain contains both nuclei as well as tracts. So I hope you are aware of what is nuclei, what is tract, right? So a bundle of cell bodies is known as nuclei, and bundle of axons is known as tracts when we are in the central nervous system, right? So this is how we term it. And these bundles of axons, when they go outside of the central nervous system, it is known as nerves, right? So these within the central nervous system, it is known as tracts. Uh, then comes midbrain. The anterior part of midbrain contains paired bundles of axons known as the cerebral peduncles. The cerebral peduncles consist of axons of the corticospinal, corticobulbar, and corticopontine tracts, which conduct nerve impulses from the motor area in the cerebral cortex to the spinal cord, medulla, and pons, respectively. Right? The posterior part of the midbrain, called the tectum, contains four rounded elevations. So this is the tectum, right? You can see that there are four rounded elevations that you can see over here. The two superior elevations are nuclei known as superior colliculi and serve as reflex centers for certain visual activities, right? So this is the superior colliculi. They serve as centers for visual activity, reflex centers for visual activity. The superior colliculi are also responsible for reflexes that govern movements of the head, eyes, and trunk in response to that visual stimuli. The two inferior elevations, the inferior colliculi, are a part of the auditory pathway. This one, inferior colliculi, right? They are part of the um auditory pathway relaying impulses from the receptors for the hearing in inner ear to the brain. These two nuclei are also reflex centers for the startle reflex, sudden movements of the head, eye, and trunk that occur when you are surprised by a loud noise such as a gunshot. So that startle reflex is also located over here in the midbrain, right? And it is catered through this inferior colliculi that are present, right? The midbrain contains several other nuclei, including the left and right substantia nigra, which are light, large, and darkly pigmented. So substantia nigra is actually the region which has a lot of these dopaminergic neurons also, which secrete dopamine. And it is also a region which is affected in case of, greatly affected in case of Parkinson's disease, right? Neurons that release dopamine extended from the substantia nigra to the basal nuclei help control subconscious muscle activities. Also present are the left and right red nuclei, which look reddish. These red nuclei, which look reddish due to rich blood supply and iron containing pigment in their neuronal cell bodies. Right? Axons from the cerebellum and cerebral cortex form synapses in the red nuclei, which help control muscular movements. Other nuclei in the brain are associated with two pairs of cranial nerves. One is the oculomotor nerves, and the other is the trochlear nerves, right? So, oculomotor and trochlear. I can't see that over here. Reticular formation, right? So, what is reticular formation? Now, let us understand this as well. In addition to well-defined nuclei already described, much of the brain stem consists of small clusters of neuronal cell bodies, which are the gray matter, and interspersed amongst small bundles of myelinated axons, which are the white matter. The broad region where white matter and gray matter exhibit a net-like arrangement is known as a reticular formation. So this, for instance, is a reticular formation, right? And this is the reticular activating system or RAS, which projects into the cerebral cortex. So thalamus, hypothalamus, these are the reticular activating systems. The ascending portion of the reticular formation is called the reticular activation system, which consists of sensory axons that project into the cerebral cortex, both directly and through the thalamus, right? The most important function of RAS or reticular activating system is consciousness, a state of wakefulness in which an individual is fully alert, aware, and oriented. Right. So, for instance, me right now I am taking this particular class. So I am fully aware. I am very alert, and I am completely oriented towards performing this task, which is to take this class. Right. Visual and auditory stimuli and mental activities can stimulate the RAS to help maintain consciousness. Another function of RAS is to help maintain attention, which is to concentrate on a single object or thought and alertness, right? So RAS also prevents sensory overload, uh, that is excessive visual and or auditory stimulation by filtering out insignificant information so that it does not reach our consciousness. For instance, an example of this is when we are trying to hear something, right? So, like for instance, you are speaking to a friend of yours in a canteen, right? So it is not like you two are the only ones who are there, right? There are multiple people around you in that canteen, and all of them are speaking. So, how does your brain know that you only have to make sense of what this person is speaking, who is talking directly to you, and not to get, uh, uh, misguided by other information also that is coming in, right? So, how does your brain know that? It is because a lot of the signal that is not crucial, it gets filtered out, right? And RAS is important for that. For instance, if I am currently teaching this lecture, I have this laptop in front of me in which I have this presentation, right? Simultaneously, there are so many things other than this laptop in my room, right? But my brain knows where to focus on, right? If I'm reading something, my brain knows I have to focus on this rather than focusing on my peripheral vision, which is going towards this diagram, right? Once I'm reading or explaining this diagram, then my peripheral vision has to be, filtered out. So it is filtering in the significant information so that our brain has only so much to process. Right? It is not confused by the excess insignificant information that it is continuously getting. Thereafter, inactivation of RAS produces sleep, a state of partial consciousness from which an individual can be aroused. Damage to RAS, on the other hand, results in coma, a state of unconsciousness from which an individual cannot be aroused, right? So, normally when we sleep, this RAS is inactive. Right, but again, we will wake up, it will again become active, right? But if there is a damage to this reticular formation, that is the result, that is what leads to this state of coma or unconsciousness from which an individual cannot be recovered, right? Or it is maybe not in our hands to recover an individual from this particular state, right? The descending portion of the RAS has connections to the cerebellum and spinal cord and helps regulate muscle tone. The slight degree of involuntary contraction in normal resting skeletal muscles, right? So, muscle tone meaning even if we are, sitting idle or even if we are laying down, the muscle is not floppy, right? It has a tone to it, right? That is what is required even when we are at rest. Otherwise, our body, when we have to wake up, at that time, all of a sudden, it cannot be like that solid state muscle contraction cannot automatically occur, right? It has to be at a basal level of muscle tone that needs to be present. So that is also coordinated by RAS or reticular formation. This portion of RAS also assists in the regulation of heart rate as well as blood pressure and respiratory rate. Then comes cerebellum, right? Another very, very crucial part of the brain. Cerebellum, which is second only to cerebrum in size, occupies the inferior and posterior aspects of the cranial cavity, right? However, we'll come and we read to about it also that cerebellum, this small portion of the brain, it contains about half the number of neurons that are present in the entire brain, right? So that of that compact neurons it has, right? Like the cerebrum, the cerebellum has highly folded surface that greatly increases the surface area of the outer gray matter cortex, allowing for greater number of neurons. The cerebrum accounts for about tenth of the brain mass, yet nearly half of the neurons in the brain. Right, so it is only 1/10 of the actual region of the brain, but still it contains around half of the neurons in the brain. The cerebellum is posterior to the medulla and the pons, and inferior to the posterior portion of the cerebrum. Right. The central constricted area is the vermis, which literally means worms, and the lateral wings or lobes are the cerebral hemispheres, right? Each hemisphere consists of lobes separated by deep and distinct fissures. The anterior lobe, the anterior lobe and posterior lobe govern subconscious aspects of the skeletal muscle movement. The foculonodular lobe on the inferior surface contribute to the equilibrium and balance. The three paired cerebral peduncles attach the cerebellum to the brainstem. These are the superior cerebellar peduncle, middle cerebellar peduncle, and inferior cerebellar peduncle. Right, they are attaching the cerebellum to the brain. These bundles of white matter, again, meaning they are myelinated axons basically, consist of axons that conduct impulses between the cerebellum and other parts of the brain. The superior cerebellar peduncle contains axons that extend from cerebellum to red nuclei of the midbrain and to several nuclei of the thalamus as well. Middle cerebellar peduncle are the largest peduncles, and you can see this red colored one. Their axons carry impulses for voluntary movements from the pontine nuclei, which receive input from the motor areas of the cerebral cortex into the cerebellum. The inferior cerebellar peduncle consists of axons of spinocerebellar tracts that carry sensory information into the cerebellum for the proprioceptors in the trunk and limb. So, Sir has already taught what proprioception is, right? It is the ability to have the knowledge of where one's uh, own organs, internal organs are, right? The axon from the vestibular apparatus of the inner ear from the vestibular nuclei of the medulla and pons that carry sensory information into the cerebellum from proprioceptors in the head. The axons from the inferior olivary nucleus of the medulla that enter the cerebellum and regulate the activity of the cerebellar neurons, as well as the axons that extend from the cerebellum to the vestibular nuclei of the medulla and pons, and the axons that extend from the cerebellum to the reticular formation as well, right? So these are the various uh, peduncles of the cerebellum. The primary function of cerebellum is to evaluate how well movements initiated by motor area in the cerebrum are actually being carried out, right? That is the primary function. So aside from this coordination of the skilled movements, the cerebrum is the main region that regulates the posture as well as balance. Cerebellum, sorry. The presence of reciprocal connections between the cerebellum and association areas of cerebral cortex suggests that the cerebellum may also have non-motor functions such as cognition, which is acquisition of certain knowledge, and language processing, right? This view is supported by imaging studies using MRI as well as PET scan. The studies also suggest that cerebellum may play a role in in processing sensory information as well, right? Then we come to diencephalon, right? So far, what have we talked about? We have talked about the cerebellum, the medulla oblongata, pons, and mesencephalon, also the midbrain region, right? So entire brainstem is done, cerebellum is done. Now we come to diencephalon. What are the two major portions of diencephalon? It is the thalamus and hypothalamus, also the epithalamus, which is not a major region, so is not represented over here, right? So diencephalon forms the central core of the brain tissue, just superior to the midbrain, right? So this is the midbrain, just superior to that is the diencephalon. It is almost completely surrounded by the cerebral hemispheres and contains numerous nuclei involved in a wide variety of sensory and motor processing between higher and lower brain centers. The diencephalon extends from the brainstem to the cerebrum and surrounds the third ventricle. It includes the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus, right? So projecting from the hypothalamus is the hypophysis or the pituitary gland, right? So this is hypothalamus, and this is the hypophysis or the pituitary gland that projects out of it, right? Portions of the diencephalon in the wall of third ventricle are called circumventricular organs, which also we'll discuss in a while. Thalamus makes about up 80% of the diencephalon and consists of paired oval masses of gray matter organized into the nuclei with interspersed tracts of white matter. The thalamus is major relay station for most sensory impulses that reach the primary sensory areas of the cerebral cortex from the spinal cord and the brainstem. This is very, very crucial, right? It is a primary relay station for the sensory impulses that are reaching the somatosensory region. It contributes to motor functions by transmitting information from the cerebellum and basal nuclei to the primary motor area in the cerebral cortex as well. It also relays nerve impulses between different areas of the cerebrum and play a role in maintenance of consciousness as well. Then comes hypothalamus, right? This hypothalamus and pituitary, as we were talking about. It is a small part of the diencephalon located inferior to the thalamus. The hypothalamus controls many body activities and is one of the major regulators of homeostasis, right? Homeostasis is the key function of hypothalamus. So, what is it? Sensory impulses related to both somatic and visceral senses arrive at the hypothalamus, as do impulses from receptors for vision, taste, and as well as smell. Other receptors within the hypothalamus itself continually monitor the osmotic pressure, the blood glucose level, hormone concentrations, and temperature of the blood. Right. So, all this homeostatic monitoring is happening at the level of hypothalamus itself. It has several very important connections with the pituitary gland and produces a variety of hormones as well. Right? Important functions of thalamus include the following: the control of ENS, which is the autonomic nervous system, which is there in heart also, right? Production of hormones, regulation of emotional and behavioral patterns, regulation of eating and drinking, control of the body temperature, which is also another homeostatic mechanism, and regulation of circadian rhythms and states of consciousness. Again, homeostasis, right? In broader terms, it is responsible for homeostatic monitoring. Then comes epithalamus over here, if you see. It is a small region superior and posterior to the thalamus and consists of the pineal gland and habenular nuclei, right? So the pineal gland is about the size of the small pea and protrudes from the posterior midline of the third ventricle. It is a part of the epithalamus only, right? Pineal gland is a part of endocrine system because it secretes the hormone melatonin. Now, what is melatonin? It is a hormone required for sleep, right? As more melatonin is liberated during darkness than in light, this hormone is thought to promote sleepiness. The habenular nuclei as are involved in the olfaction, especially emotional responses to odors such as a loved one's cologne or mom's chocolate chip cookies baking in the oven, right? Uh, Etc. Then comes circumventricular organs. Now, what is circumventricular organs? As we discussed earlier, parts of diencephalon are known as circumventricular organs or CVOs because they lie in the wall of the third ventricle and can monitor chemical changes in the blood because they lack the blood-brain barrier. So there are actually parts of the diencephalon which lack the blood-brain barrier, and this is why they can actually monitor these chemical changes within the blood, right? That is why this diencephalon in totality is responsible for this homeostasis because these, you know, uh, it is monitored by diencephalon organs in general. So CVOs include a part of hypothalamus, which is actually maintaining that homeostasis, the pineal gland, pituitary gland, and few other nearby structures, right? Why also hypothalamus and pituitary gland? Because they are also secreting hormones into blood from here, right? Functionally, these regions coordinate homeostatic activities of the endocrine and nervous system, such as regulation of blood pressure, fluid balance, hunger, as well as thirst. Right? So, we come to cerebrum at last, right? So, as we know, it is the seat of intelligence. It is the largest area of the brain. You can see this entire region is the cerebrum, and you can see that it has been color coded into multiple different colors, right? Why? Because cerebrum itself is also subdivided into different regions, right? We'll understand what these regions are and how they function, right? So it provides us with the ability to read, write, and speak, to make calculations, compose music, and to remember the past plan for the future and imagine things that have never existed before, right? All the seat of cognition or intelligence is cerebrum. It consists of an outer cerebral cortex, this one, an internal region of cerebral white matter and gray matter nuclei deep within the white matter, right? So, cerebral cortex, when we talk about, it is a region of gray matter that forms the outer rim of the cerebrum, right? Uh, Gray matter meaning it has the cell nuclei over here, right? So you can see that there are four major regions that this cerebral cortex is divided into. One is the frontal lobe, then is the cerebral cortex, then is the occipital lobe, and then is the temporal lobe, right? Although only 2 to 4 mm thick, like only the top region is the cerebral cortex, right? The cortex contains billions of neurons arranged in layers, right? During the embryonic development, when the brain size increases rapidly, the gray matter of the cortex enlarges much faster than the deeper white matter. So this is where during development, most of the divisions are happening in the neurons, right? As a result, cortical region rolls and folds on itself. That is why we have this sulci and gyri, those ridges or those these kinds of patterns in the brain. The folds are called the gyri or convolutions. The deepest grooves between the folds are known as fissures, right? For instance, this is a deep groove, right? So this is known as a fissure, right? Uh, and the shallower grooves between the folds are called sulci, like this, right? The most prominent fissure, the longitudinal fissure, separates the cerebrum into right and left halves called the cerebral hemispheres, right? So that is the uh, this central fissure known as, what was it called? I, it has completely slipped into my out of my mind, right? It is known as a central fissure only, but what is the region that is connecting the two? That is the question that has skipped out of my mind. If I recall, I'll just say. So the cerebral hemispheres are connected internally by the corpus callosum, a broad band of white matter containing axons that extend between these two hemispheres. Each cerebral hemisphere can be further subdivided into several lobes. The lobes are named after the bones that cover them. The frontal, the parietal, right? Parietal over here, temporal, and occipital lobes, right? So, because just on top of this, there are bones, the facial and the skull bones that are present. So, these lobes are named after the bones that are covering them. The central sulcus separates the frontal lobe, this one, from the parietal lobe. The major gyrus, the precentral gyrus located immediately anterior to central sulcus, contains the primary motor cortex, right? This is the primary motor cortex, and which is an area of the cerebral cortex, right? So in the frontal lobe is the primary motor cortex, this strip. Another major gyrus, the postcentral gyrus, which located immediately posterior to the central sulcus, contains a primary somatosensory area of the cerebral cortex. So this region in the just next to the central sulcus in this parietal lobe, this particular strip is the somatosensory cortex actually. The lateral cerebral sulcus or fissure over here separates the frontal lobe from the temporal lobe, right? The parieto-occipital sulcus separates this one, parieto-occipital sulcus, it goes over here. It separates the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe. A fifth part of the cerebrum, the insula, cannot be seen at the surface of the brain because it lies within the lateral cerebral sulcus, uh, right within this, uh, deep to the parietal, frontal, and temporal lobes. So, again, this is a part from the book. Cerebrum is the seat of intelligence. It provides us with the ability to read, write, speak, make calculations, compose music, remember past, plan for future, and to create, which we have read. These are the sulci, and these are the gyri, gyrus sulcus. This is the cerebral cortex, this particular dark colored region. This is the cerebral white matter, the white colored region. These are the fissures, the deeper grooves are the fissures, right? Details of a gyrus sulcus and fissure is shown over here, right? Apart from that, this is the frontal lobe in both hemispheres. This is the parietal lobe in both hemispheres. This is the occipital lobe in both hemispheres. And towards the bottom, if we look, there will be the temporal lobe as well, right? So this is the temporal lobe, right? Uh, and insula, as it was said, it is towards the deep inside, so we can't see it on the outside, right? So, what are the primary functions of principal parts of these brains, right? Uh, so individually, we have not gone into understanding the part of this cerebral regions as of now, but we will understand this. Let us revise for the other parts, right? So brain stem, if we just zoom into this, brain stem contains a medulla oblongata. It contains sensory, ascending, and motor tracts. Cardiovascular centers regulates the heartbeat and blood vessel diameter. Medullary respiratory center regulates breathing, and it uh, uh, regulates breathing and contains gracile nucleus, cuneate nucleus, gustatory nucleus, cochlear nucleus, and vestibular nuclei. Then inferior olivary nucleus provides instructions that cerebellum uses to adjust muscle activity when learning new motor skills. Other nuclei coordinate vomiting, swallowing, sneezing, coughing, and hiccuping, and it contains nuclei of origin for vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory hypoglossal, cranial nerves, and reticular formation, which is also a part of medulla, pons, midbrain, diencephalon, function in consciousness and arousal, right? Then comes pons. Over here, it contains sensory and motor tracts. The pontine nuclei relay nerve impulses from the motor areas of the cerebral cortex to the cerebellum. It also contains vestibular nuclei that are part of this equilibrium pathway to the brain. The pontine respiratory group helps control the breathing. It contains nuclei of origin for trigeminal, abducens, facial, and vestibulocochlear nerves. The midbrain, as we have already discussed, contains sensory and motor tracts. The superior colliculi coordinate movements of the head, eyes, trunk, in response to uh, visual stimuli. The inferior colliculi coordinate movements of head, eyes, trunk in response to auditory stimuli. The substantia nigra over here and red nucleus contribute to control of movement and contain nuclei of origin for oculomotor and trochlear cranial nerves. Right? Then comes cerebellum. It smooths and coordinates contractions of the skeletal muscle, regulates posture, balance, may have a role in cognition as well as language processing. Then come the regions of diencephalon, the epithalamus, thalamus, and hypothalamus. Thalamus relays almost all the sensory information to the cerebral cortex. It contributes to motor functions by transmitting information from the cerebellum and basal nuclei to primary motor areas of the cerebral cortex and plays a role in maintenance of consciousness. Then comes hypothalamus. It controls and integrates activity of the autonomic nervous system. It produces hormones, including releasing hormones, inhibiting hormones, oxytocin, antidiuretic hormone, and regulates emotional, behavioral patterns. It also contains feeding and satiety centers, which regulate eating, the thirst center, which regulates drinking, and suprachiasmatic nucleus, which regulates the circadian rhythm. It also controls the body temperatures by serving as the body's thermostat. Epithalamus consists of pineal glands, which secrete melatonin, and habenular nuclei, which is involved in olfaction. Then we come to cerebrum, the major, broader scope of function of cerebrum. We'll discuss. It is the sensory area of the cerebral cortex involved in perception of sensory information. Motor areas control execution of voluntary movements. Association areas deal with more complex integrative functions such as memory, personality traits, intelligence. Basal nuclei help initiate the term and terminate movements and suppress unwanted movements and regulate muscle tone. The limbic system promotes range of emotions, including pleasure, pain, docility, affection, fear, and anger. Right? So these are the major functions. Now let us move to understanding the functional organization of the cerebral cortex per se. Right. So uh, we'll dive into that. Just a moment. It's already 8:30. I don't know whether we'll be able to start the sensory and motor modalities today. So at least this part we'll finish. If we are not able to begin with those because that is also a huge topic and that requires more explanation. I just can't keep reading and moving on. That requires explanation also, right? So that part, if we are not able to do it today, I'll just keep it for the next lecture, right? So there are specific types of sensory motor and integrative signals that are processed in certain regions of the cerebral cortex, right? Sensory areas receive sensory information and are involved in perception, the conscious awareness of a sensation. Motor areas control the execution of voluntary movements. Over here, you can see also, we were saying, right, the primary somatosensory area over here and primary motor area over here. So this is the frontal lobe. In the frontal lobe lies this area, and then the parietal lobe lies the somatosensory area. Association areas deal with more complex integrative functions such as memory, emotion, reasoning, will, judgment, personality trait, and intelligence. So it is not just a stimulus and response to stimulus that they are controlling more complex functions, right? So sensory areas, when we talk about it, sensory impulses arise mainly in the posterior half of both the cerebral hemispheres in regions behind the central sulci. In the cerebral cortex, primary sensory areas receive the sensory information that has been relayed from the peripheral sensory receptors through lower regions of the brain, such as thalamus, right? Sensory association areas are often adjacent to the primary areas. So these are the primary areas, for instance, right? The primary somatosensory area, and this is the somatosensory association area just next to it. Similarly, primary motor area and motor association area will also be somewhere close to it, right? Suppose this is the primary visual area and this is the visual association area. So it is close by generally, right? They usually receive input from the primary areas and from other brain regions as well. Sensory association areas integrate sensory experiences to generate meaningful patterns of recognition and awareness. Primary somatosensory area, if we talk about this one, areas 1, 2, and 3 over here is located directly posterior to the central sulcus of the posterior, meaning towards the back of the central. This is the central sulcus, and just towards the posterior side of it is these primary somatosensory area of each cerebral hemisphere in the postcentral gyrus of each parietal lobe, right? The primary somatosensory area receives nerve impulses for touch, pressure, vibration, itch, tickle, temperature, pain, and proprioception, and is involved in perception of these somatic senses. Right? The map of the entire body is present in the primary somatosensory area. Each point within the area receives impulses from specific part of the body. Right? The size of the cortical area receiving impulses from a particular part of the body depends on the number of receptors present there and rather than on the size of the body part, right? For instance, we were saying that the lip, the tongue, the fingers, the hand will have more area dedicated to it in the somatosensory cortex than, say, the limbs, the legs, etc., right? So this is the sensory homunculus. We have already spoken about it. So we'll not spend much time over here, right? Then comes the primary visual area. right? So this is the primary visual area, number 17. It is located at the posterior tip of the occipital lobe, mainly on the medial surface next to the longitudinal fissure, and it receives visual information and is involved in the visual perception, right? It is located in the superior part of the temporal. Then comes the primary auditory area. So this is the temporal part. This is the auditory association area. Where is the primary auditory area? I think in this particular primary auditory area, this one, 40, 41, 42, right? So it is located in the superior part of the temporal lobe near the lateral cerebral sulcus and receives information for sound and is involved in the auditory perception. It is located at the base of the postcentral gyrus, superior to the lateral cerebral sulcus in the parietal cortex. This is a gustatory area now. Okay, let us quickly find this primary gustatory area over here, right? At the base of this thing in the parietal cortex itself, and it receives impulses for taste involved in gustatory perception and taste discrimination, right? Then comes the primary olfactory area. Now, where is this? Okay, I can see it over here at least. It is located in the temporal lobe on the medial aspect. So, in the temporal lobe itself, it is associated in the medial aspect and receives multiple impulses for smell and is involved in olfactory perception. So, because it is located on in the middle, that is why it is not visible over here, right? Then come the motor areas, these areas, right? Motor output from the cerebral cortex flows mainly from the anterior part of each hemisphere. It is located in the precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe, this particular region, as is true for the primary somatosensory area. A map of the entire body is present in the primary motor area as well, which is the motor homunculus that we talked about. Each region within the area controls voluntary contractions of the specific muscles or group of muscles, right? Electrical stimulation of any point in the primary motor area causes contraction of specific muscle, skeletal muscle fibers on the opposite side of the body. So it will, so these control of fingers, hand, lips, tongue, etc. Everything is in this primary motor area itself. But at the same time, the fingers and hand of my right finger and hand will be controlled by my left primary motor area and in the brain and vice versa, right? So different muscles are represented unequally in the primary motor area. That is why we have studied that homunculus, right? More cortical area is devoted to those muscles which are involved in skilled, complex, or delicate movement, as is represented over here in the motor homunculus. Then we come to Broca's speech area number 44 and 45, these, right? Now, again, these Broca's area and Wernicke's area also I have discussed in maybe week 2 lectures, if I'm not wrong. So people who have attended that, you might recall it. We had even discussed how these particular regions were, found in the first place. Over here, we'll discuss what they are, right? In areas 44, 45 over here, the Broca's speech area, it is located in the frontal lobe close to the lateral cerebral sulcus. It is responsible for speaking and understanding language, which are complex activities that involve several sensory association and motor cortex, motor areas of the cortex. In about 97% of population, these language areas are localized in the left hemisphere itself. Right? Most of the people, the language area is localized in the left hemisphere. The planning and production of speech occur in the left frontal lobe in most people. Right? The association area of cerebrum consists of large areas of occipital, parietal, and temporal lobes, and of the frontal lobes anterior to the motor areas. These are the association areas, right? The association areas are connected with one another by association tracts, right? So again, tracts meaning there are bundles of axons that are connecting these areas, right? In area 5 and 7, for instance, if you see these are the somatosensory association areas. It is just posterior to and receives input from the primary somatosensory area over here, as well as from the thalamus and other parts of the brain also. It will receive inputs, right? This area permits you to determine the exact shape and texture of an object by feeling it, to determine the orientation of one object with respect to another as they are felt, and to sense the relationship of one body part to another, right? So those kind of complex derivations are carried out in the somatosensory association area. Another role of the somatosensory association area is the storage of memories of the past somatic sensory experiences, which enable you to compare current sensations with previous experiences, right? Then we come to the visual association area. Just give me a moment. I'll just plug in the chart. Yes. Um, When we come to the discussion of the visual association area, again, it is close to the visual, primary visual area itself, right? So this area 1819, if you see over here, is located in the occipital lobe and receives sensory impulses from the primary visual area, which is just next to it, and from the thalamus also, right? It relates present and past visual experiences and is essential for the recognizing and evaluating what is seen. Right. So, primary visual area, what it will do is, for instance, I am seeing the screen. It will tell me that, okay, this is what you are seeing, right? Even if I'm reading, it might have some association with the visual and the language area, and together they will work. There will be this visual processing association area, language association area. In together, they will work and they will tell me that, okay, this is the language you are reading. These are the words that are there, and this is what these words mean, right? In real time, I'm not thinking about this, right? I am all this is happening in fractions of milliseconds also, right? So that is why continuously we can speak, continuously we can read and make sense of it at the same time, right? So we don't feel that delay. But what this visual association area does is that even if I'm looking at something, for instance, this brain, right? I might think that, okay, I remember when I first read it, I might have some recollection of that lecture also and how it was taught to me. Maybe that way I can teach it to you as well, right? So all these things are higher order cognitive things that is wherein which is not just what I'm seeing, but my memory associated to some past experience regarding it is also being looped in, and that is also being considered in when I am speaking to you regarding that subject, right? So that is also happening through this visual association area, right? Similarly, a very basic example would be that I look at a person, right, and I recognize the person. So I am just looking at the person, right? The visual association area is going back, checking my memory that, oh, I know this person. Who is this person? Oh, this person is, XYZ, right? And I know XYZ from here, or from that particular function that we met at, right? So that is what this visual association area is actually doing. Then comes a facial recognition area, again, a subpart of what I just explained, corresponding roughly to areas 20. Uh, so it is not visible over here, 20, 21, and 37. In the inferior temporal lobe, it receives nerve impulses from the visual association area itself. This area stores information about faces and it allows you to recognize people by their faces. So there is a separate dedicated area in your uh, brain for facial recognition also, right? Similarly, there will be some voice recognition area also where which maybe stores the memories related to that, right? So it is possible. Then the facial recognition area in the right hemisphere is usually more dominant than the corresponding region in the left hemisphere. Again, for most of the people, these memories reside in the right side of your brain, right? For instance, if a person had a lesion or a region of brain injury in that particular region of the facial recognition area in the right hemisphere itself, right, the person might not be able to recognize other people, right? On the contrary, if it was there at the same point in the left hemisphere, maybe that particular activity will not get as affected, right? Then comes the auditory association area. It is area 22, as you can see over here. It is located inferior and posterior to the primary auditory area in the temporal cortex and allows you to recognize a particular sound as speech, music, or noise, right? Then come the orbitofrontal cortex, right? Corresponding over here to the prefrontal cortex areas. It corresponds roughly to area 11 along the lateral part of the frontal lobe and receives sensory impulses from primary olfactory area, right? This area allows you to identify odors and discriminate among different odors, right? So odors also, how we identify odors is because we have probably smelt it before, right? For you, if I bring, a um, uh, South Korean dish or say a Japanese dish that you have never ever heard of or never ever eaten, right? So, and it is unique. So the smell is also not similar to any of the smell of the Indian dishes or the Western dishes that we are having on a day-to-day basis, right? So that will be a new odor for you, right? Or a new taste for you also, right? So that will be a new a thing to your this. You will not be able to go and find it in your orbitofrontal area also or the statary association area also that oh I know this taste, oh I know this smell, because you won't know it. Probably it will be new for you, but if you have it for a second time, this is where that memory will be recovered from, right? But this is the region that will fetch that memory from another region, right? It uh, so during olfactory processing, the orbitofrontal cortex of the right hemisphere exhibits greater activity than corresponding region in the left hemisphere. Again, most of this more dominant olfactory processing is happening in the right part of the brain than the left hemisphere. It is a Vernix area now, right? Again, this also we have spoken about when we had talked about the Broca's area in that week 2 or week 3 lecture. So it is the posterior language area, a broad region in the left temporal, this one, in the left temporal and parietal lobes that interprets the meaning of speech by recognizing spoken words, right? It is active as you translate words into thoughts. The region in the right hemisphere that corresponds to Broca's and Wernicke's area in the left hemisphere also contribute to verbal communication by adding emotional content such as anger or joy to spoken words. Right? For instance, both of these are more dominant in the left hemisphere, the Broca's speech area and the Wernicke's area. So, language composition, comprehension, and understanding of language is mostly a part that that is in the left hemisphere of the brain, but corresponding region in the right hemisphere also has something to do with this communication part itself. But what it does rather more, often than actual comprehension or of the speech or understanding of speeches, it gives an emotional content. So, how when you say something, you might sound joyous or you might sound angry or when you're perceiving what is said by somebody else, that person might be sounding very scared or excited, right? That is comprehended by this right side of the brain, which is corresponding to this Broca's area and Wernicke's area in the left hemisphere, right? So, for instance, if a good example I like to give is if you have seen the Big Bang Theory, right? So, Sheldon would probably have a very developed Wernicke's and Broca's area. He was very good at, understanding language and, saying a lot of things, the language comprehension also. But he was not that great at the emotional content or understanding emotions or expressing emotions. So maybe that right hemisphere regions of this particular region were not as developed, maybe, right? So that is just an example. Yeah. So then we come to the common integrative area. Then these areas, suppose 5, 7, 39, 40. These are the common integrative areas. They are bordered by somatosensory, visual, and auditory association areas. It receives nerve impulses from these areas and from the primary gustatory area as well, and the primary olfactory area, thalamus parts of the brain. So it is integrating all the information that we get, right? For instance, at one time we might be seeing something. So, for instance, I love sambar, right? So if somebody brought sambar and rice to me, I will be smelling it, I might taste it, I might be looking at it also. So there are multiple senses that are getting involved, right? So there has to be some common region also where everything can be integrated. So this is one of those areas. This area integrates sensory interpretations from the association areas and impulses from other areas, allowing the formation of thoughts based on variety of sensory inputs, right? It then transmits signals to other parts of the brain for the appropriate response to the sensory signal that it has interpreted finally. Then comes the prefrontal cortex, right? This area, which is also known as frontal association area, right? Um, Prefrontal cortex over here is an extensive area in the anterior portion of the frontal lobe that is well developed in primates, especially in humans. This area has numerous connections with other areas of the cerebral cortex, such as thalamus, hypothalamus, limbic system, as well as cerebellum. The prefrontal cortex is concerned with makeup of a person's personality, intellect, complex learning abilities, recall of information, initiative, judgment, foresight, reasoning, conscience, then intuition, mood, planning for the future, development of abstract ideas, etc. Right? This area, then comes the premotor area, right? This one, the premotor area. It is a motor association area that is immediately anterior to the primary motor area. The neurons in this area communicate with the primary motor cortex, the sensory association areas in the parietal lobe, the basal nuclei, and the thalamus. The premotor area deals with learned motor activities of a complex and sequential nature, for instance, driving, right? It generates nerve impulses that cause specific group of muscles to contract with in a specific sequence as and when you write your name. Right, writing your name is also a complex motor activity. Driving, swimming, right, doing some activity. Premotor area also serves as a memory bank for such movements. Then comes the frontal eye field area. This one, 8. Uh, it is located in frontal cortex, which is sometimes included in the premotor area as well. It controls voluntary scanning movements of the eye, like those you just used in reading the sentence, right? So that is also a motor function of the eye, right? So that is basically governed by this frontal eye field area. Uh, so this is a representation of various modalities of the vision of various kinds of perceptions also. So vision, for instance, is governed by these kinds of cells. Smell is governed by this kind of a receptor, right? Taste is just governed by this kind of a receptor. Similarly, touch, thermal senses, pain, hearing, balance, and proprioception. Each of these has a modality that is associated with it. Probably we'll go forward with this modality. I'll just classify the sensory receptors. I will not begin with the discussion of the senses by itself, right? Because that is another very big discussion. I don't think we'll be able to complete in another hour also, right? So this part I'll get through, and then we can end today's session at least. So when we classify sensory receptors, they could either be chemoreceptors, wherein the stimuli are chemicals, right? Or they could be photoreceptors, wherein the stimulus is a light or photon. Or it could be mechanoreceptors, wherein the stimuli are pressure, pulses, etc., right? So, when we talk about the receptive field of a sensory neuron, it is a spatial domain in the sense organ where stimulation excites or inhibits the neuron, right? For instance, you know that the receptive field for your finger or your hand is small, right? If you put a pin, or if I have, longer nails, if I pinch over here, it will only affect this particular region. It will not affect the entire hand, maybe, right? So the receptor field is smaller, but uh, so that is basically the area which is stimulated by a particular uh, uh, by a particular stimulus, right? So over here, this is a representation of the receptor field of the hand, for instance, right? If we classify sensory receptors, right, visual system which has this modality of vision, its stimulus is photons or light. Its receptor is class as photoreceptor, and the receptor cells that are present in the eye are the rods and the cones. Right. Similarly, if we talk about auditory sensory system, the modality is hearing. Right. What is the stimulus? It is sound or pressure waves. So what is the receptor class? It is going to be mechanoreceptors, because the pressure wave is going to apply, the stimulus is going to be pressure over here. The receptor cells are the hair cells in the cochlea. Then come the vestibular sensory system. The modality is the motion of the head, right? The stimulus is gravity, acceleration, head motion. The receptor class over here also is mechanoreceptors, and the receptor cells are hair cells in the vestibular labyrinths within the ear, right? The semicircular canals, those regions. Then come the somatosensory system, right? Then the receptor cells over here are the cranial and dorsal root ganglion cells with the receptors. For touch, for the modality that is touch, the stimulus is skin deformation and motion. The receptor class again is mechanoreceptors, and the receptor cells are within the skin. Proprioception is the stimulus is muscle length, muscle force, joint angle. Again, receptor class is mechanoreceptor, and the receptor cells are within the muscle spindles and joint capsules. Then, in case of pain, the stimulus is noxious stimuli. It could be thermal, mechanical, or chemical stimuli. And that is why all three types of receptors are there over here, and all tissues except CNS have these receptor cells, right? So this also we have explained that within the brain there are no these pain receptors, right? Then itch. The stimulus for itch is histamine, a chemical, right? So the receptor class is a chemoreceptor, and the receptor cells are are within the skin, right? Then comes visceral, which is not painful. The wide range of mechanical, and thermal stimuli are there. So that is why all three receptor classes again are there. Receptor cells are within the GI tract, the urinary bladder, lung, etc. Then comes gustatory sensory system, where the modality is taste. So the stimulus is chemical, and the receptor class over here is also chemoreceptor, that the receptor cells are within the taste bud. And the olfactory has a modality of smell that we can, feel. And the stimulus over here is odorant, which is another chemical. So the receptor class is chemoreceptors. And the receptor cells are the olfactory sensory neurons, right? From here, I'll pick up in the next session now, right? The different senses and the receptive fields, how the senses are working, what are the modalities, um, what is the neural circuitry of each of these senses, all that we'll study, but we'll take it up in the next session maybe, right? So, if there was a doubt in anything that we discussed today, you may please ask. Um, and else, I'll just end the session. We'll meet again next Monday between this time, 7 to 9, right? Okay. So thank you so much. I'll just stop the recording.